Hello, guys, and welcome to yet another Call Hub webinar. For those of you who are new, let me give you a little bit of introduction about what we are doing here. So, Call Hub, as you might know, is a communication and software platform. We create all kinds of means to communicate any messages that you may want out to the world in almost any form, whether it's digital, whether it's emails, through text, through calls. So we started this company with our idea that we wanted to be change makers. We wanted to do something so that people who have an idea to change things can have the means to make it, and it should not break the bank, so to speak. So, we want to be affordable, and we want to make it such that anybody who wants to start a change, anybody who wants to start a revolution can do so from their homes and reach out to the people that they want to reach out to, so to allow that change to happen. We're going strong for like 10 years now. So we began, for example, with like texting and messaging. Today, it's like a whole suite of offerings, from like emails to like, planned SMSs, marketing campaigns, to just like old fashioned, whether you want to do GeoTV also, we'll help you arrange that. So that's what Call Hub does. Now, in all of these webinars, a common theme has been that our desire to help the people who work with us and like our friends to understand a little more about how these things happen, how messaging happens, how campaigning happens, and how to do it in a way, in a practical sense. Like, we don't want to give you like just information from somewhere. No, we want to talk to people who are on ground, who have done this for a while, and who can give us real advice on how to take our campaigns to a new next level, or at least how to make them more effective and efficient. Now, in the past, for example, we have spoken to campaign managers, we have spoken to organizers, we have spoken to technology heads, people who are creating new kinds of software to reach out, people who have spent decades on the streets, just like knocking doors and speaking to that. And all of this comes around, the same sort of ideas that we had about this webinar and how we want to conduct it. Now, the same theme, we were thinking about what to have for like the month of July, and we had decided that we would want to talk about advertising. But advertising is a big business, especially in America. Of course, people are literally going to spend $1 billion on ads. But the question is that, are these ads actually effective? Now, we can get into the technical side. We can do the whole, here's a PowerPoint presentation. Here are like some graphs that will show you this is the reach, etc. But that didn't feel very real, especially for like people like us who talk to like, normal people. And we're like, we're running our campaigns in our own small little world. So that didn't feel real. So we wanted to speak to someone who could tell us how these ads are made, what is a good ad, and more importantly, in a modern sense. I mean, the days of like old-fashioned ads that are just like a few lines of text or just somebody reading it out are long gone. We need to speak to like the new generation, especially Gen Z, and we need to speak to them in voice and in video, which is where the difference is. No one is going to really be that affected by text so much as video nowadays. So our idea was, let's talk to somebody who's actually made these ads, and they can tell us what the difference is based on their own experiences. And that is why I'm more than happy to welcome Maria with us. So hello, Maria. She has a lot of experience in this. She has been making ads for many, many years, and she's an independent ad maker in the sense that, she runs a studio from her home, and she picks up contracts and she makes these ads. Of course, she makes a whole gamut of voiceovers, from like TV spots all the way to radio, etc. But we are today going to speak a little more focused on her political ads, which she has recorded for several campaigns. So yeah, without taking up more of your time, hi, Maria.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so glad to be here with everybody today. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got just a short presentation to walk through today. So my name is Maria Pendolino. I work today primarily as a voiceover actor with my own company, Voice by Maria Incorporated. I'm also the founder of Blue Wave Voiceover, which is a talent collective that strives to provide voice performers for advertisements that look and sound like America today, spanning the generations from Gen Z through baby boomers and representing the diverse cultures that we have here in the United States. If you want to connect with me, my website is voicebymaria.com. Also, if you're interested in that talent collective, it's bluewavevoiceover.com, and I'm at Maria Pendo on socials. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's what I would love to cover today in our time together. We've done some introductions here, creating a great ad, the different ad platforms that are out there, and I'll also share some specific information for folks who are working on political campaigns or issue campaigns as to which advertising platforms are interested in your business and which ones have banned those types of advertisements. I'll talk a little bit about how you can find talented professionals to collaborate with on any sort of advertisements or media that you're producing for your campaign or your issue ad. I'll talk a little bit about what it means to align your work with your values, especially in this space as it pertains to working in the political space and issue space. And then we'll wrap up at the end. So let's kick off by talking about where I come from and what my kind of background is. I started my career coming out of college working in marketing, merchandising, and project management for a global bank. And one of the things that I learned really quickly was the different ways that you can communicate with your audience, whether that is how they are hearing from you on the telephone system when customers are calling in, how they are seeing and interacting with your brand if they come into your physical space, how they are learning more about your brand, potentially through commercial advertisements or placements, and what it means to grow a brand. During my time at this bank, we opened 90 additional locations throughout the United States. So not only were we communicating to existing customers, but we were also looking at growing the business. And after I decided that banking was not where I wanted to work for the rest of my life, I actually pursued a career in being an actor. And I've settled mostly on voice acting now for about 14 years. And a lot of the work I do is advertisements for nonprofits, advocacy groups, campaigns, candidates, and ballot initiatives from the local level to the federal level. I also, in 2020, founded Blue Wave Voiceover, which is a freelance talent collective. And in general, I am just a lover and consumer of all things advertising. So while there are people who probably record things on their DVR so they can fast forward through the commercials, I am the person who is watching each and every commercial. I'm paying attention to how they're communicating. I'm paying attention to the voices they chose, the actors they chose, what kind of sense of humor a brand has. I have kind of a photographic memory for recalling commercial advertisements, useful at bar trivia sometimes, but something that I'm passionate about. And just to call it out, I am a women-owned small business and a disabled-owned small business. So let's talk a little bit about conceptualizing a great spot, a great advertisement. The first question that you need to ask yourself as you're beginning to embark on a quest of creating something for advertising is, what are you trying to accomplish? So when we're talking specifically about political campaigns and in the issue and advocacy space, there are a few specific lanes that spots tend to fall into. So you could be wanting to communicate a brand or image, right? So this could be introducing a candidate to an audience for the first time or helping them get to know them. I'm thinking about candidate ads where you see people walking down like a very traditional main street. They're holding a baby, they're grabbing an ice cream cone, kind of trying to communicate through visuals and voiceover those classic American values that might uplift someone, right? You're bringing this image or brand into the public space. Another very popular type of ad is a call to action. So you're asking people to take a specific action at the end of the ad. That could be asking them to make a donation. That could be asking them to text a number, join the movement, text join to 54321, right? Anything where you are specifically trying to activate an audience, call to action space, galvanizing that group. There's another type of ad that we see a lot in this space, and it's called a comparative or a contrast ad. Typically, what that does is it starts out with a negative portrayal of either a candidate or an issue that you disagree with. So you do not want this person to be elected, but you would love for them to consider electing this person. So somewhere in the middle of the spot, we have a transition that goes from negative to positive. So we're comparing two choices. And then finally, we have just a pure perceived negative ad. This is called colloquially an attack ad in our space, but you are basically using the entirety of your media budget for this spot in communicating negative information or perceived negative information about a competitor, about the other side of the issue. You are letting the audience know the negative implications of this person getting elected or that particular issue being passed. Another decision that you have to make really early in your ad making journey is, are you going to use video versus audio? Now, this question sometimes comes up in a context of budget. It is cheaper to produce an audio only spot than it is to produce a video spot. So the key differences in the mediums that we're seeing, TV ads, you typically have shorter scripts and you are subscribing more to the advertising model of show, don't tell. So you can use on-camera actors to speak and do actions. You can include visuals. You can use stock footage, animation, etc. And you're communicating that information visually alongside or in addition to voiceover that's telling an audience information or asking them to do something. With radio ads, the voiceover is all you have. So typically we're seeing more text that's being read by an announcer or a character. And you can use music and sound effects to add, some feel, proximity, and ambiance, but the sound effects can only communicate so much, and you're catching people only with one sense, the hearing, the audio sense. We have internet ads. A lot of them are skippable. So you have to plan out carefully what happens in the first 6 seconds of, for instance, a pre-roll ad placement. And your ad might actually be 15 or 30 seconds, and you want to try and hook that viewer or listener in that first 6 seconds so they don't skip your ad and they actually see it through to completion. And then we have ads in social media, boosted and promoted posts that appear in the feed. Can you craft a compelling ad spot that feels like an organic post? Can you almost trick someone to stay on that post in their feed and watch it, believing that it's someone they follow, something that they would normally interact with, even if it's truly an ad? And some of the ways people do that are using very similar to influencer type of behavior, like direct address to the camera, right? I'm speaking directly to you, to one person in an engaging way. When we talk about what it takes to create a great ad, from a purely nuts and bolts standpoint, the biggest recommendation I have for you is don't overwrite your spot. As a voice actor, I am typically one of the very last people to come in to the ad creation team. A lot of work has usually taken place by the time that I'm invited to add my creative stamp to it. And one of the things that gets very challenging is if you move too far along in the process without kind of gut checking how many words you're trying to communicate, you can get really locked into a space and then you're ending up with way too much information for the time allotted. And therefore, everything has to move really, really quickly and your message kind of gets lost. It doesn't get heard. So the biggest advice that I can give you is just being really, really thoughtful and choosy about what actual words make it into the final copy that you put into your spot. I put in a little bit of a guideline for you when you're thinking about what you can actually write and how much real estate you have. So if we're talking about a casual conversational read, which is kind of like the pace and speed that I'm talking at right now, that clocks in at about 2.5 words a second. So if you were making a 60-second ad, you have about 150 words. If you're making a 30-second ad, you have about 75 words. If you're making a 15-second ad, you have about 37 words. And if you are making a specifically 6-second ad that's running as pre-roll on YouTube, or if you're thinking about the first 6 seconds of a 15-second ad or a 30-second ad, you have about 15 words. Now, some states require disclaimers either to be put on the screen like a chyron, or in an audio space, you actually have to verbalize the disclaimer. This is similar to disclaimers that you hear for sweepstakes or disclaimers you hear for car leases. Similarly, some political ads or issue ads in certain states are required to have a disclaimer appended to them. It's different in every state, so definitely check into your state's regulations or where you're going to be running your ad. So when a voice actor is reading text at a disclaimer speed, it's closer to about 3 words per second. I also want to call out some important things when it comes to not overwriting your spot. Microsoft Word will throw you under the bus if you are just using word count for certain things. For example, numbers. So if your copy has words like text 54321 in a call to action, your eye and the word counter in Microsoft Word would see 54321 altogether as one word. But in reality, when it's spoken out loud, it's 5 words, 54321. That can add extra time to your script. So I would recommend when you're doing a word count on your script to actually write out numbers so you see how many actual words you have if you're getting close to your top number of words. When you are putting URLs in scripts, oops, sorry, I scrolled the wrong one. There we go. Okay. When you are putting URLs in your script, We can all agree that we do not need http:// so you don't need that to be verbalized. People get it. You also really don't need www. We've had the internet long enough that we understand how to put a web address into our browser bar. So just go ahead and give us voicebymaria.com. We don't need www.voicebymaria.com. It takes up a lot of real estate and you don't need it. I'll also say if you are doing a vanity URL and you are google.com/donate and you're trying to verbalize that vanity thing at the end, all you need to say is /. You don't need to say / because it's not a /, it's a /. I will also call out that if your desired script has emotion in it, if you are trying to convince folks with any kind of sincere displays of emotion or drama with your ad, inspiration, care, concern, anger, those things take time. They need nuance. They need breathing room. Emotion is communicated not only in the tone of voice by your on-camera actors or a voice performer, but also in the tempo. So drawing out some of the words actually adds to the effect and the drama of the spot. But if you've given somebody too many things to say, you lose that nuance, you lose that tempo, and you lose that emotion. The power of authenticity is something that I think is really interesting in advertising, and especially what we're seeing today. So I've put some questions to consider. And we know that the target audiences that you're going after are not necessarily a monolith, and maybe you have different target audiences. But I think some things to consider. What does your key demographic and audience target look like? What do they sound like? How do they speak? What do they value? How do they interact and behave with media? This is important. How can you meet them where they are at versus trying to get them to come to you, right? So I think it's important that you represent your target audience with performers and choices in your ad that identify with that audience. So here's an example of something that I've worked on a lot in the last year and a half. Consider a nonprofit that's trying to effect change in the reproductive healthcare space, which of course in the United States is an incendiary topic. So if this nonprofit's target audience is women in their 20s and 30s trying to galvanize that population, if you were producing a television spot, would you choose an on-camera actor or a voice actor that looked and sounded like Sam Elliott? You can understand how a divergent population and performer matchup could potentially not communicate the right message, right? Also, when you're choosing on-camera performers or stock footage, you can specifically look to choose to feature folks from diverse backgrounds. I'll call out that Getty Images, which is a huge supplier of both still stock imagery and video stock imagery, they have a really great talk in their series called The Download about being authentic in the videos and images that you choose to represent your brand, your cause, and your campaign. They've got a whole panel of experts that talk specifically about this topic, and they share specific information about how to search for authentic representation in your media. So I really recommend that. Another thing that I would call out is Psychology Today has an awesome article called Why Inclusive Advertising is a Win-Win. And basically, in short, if we see ourselves represented in the advertising media that we're consuming, we are more likely to feel connected to that ad. And that makes us more likely to make a purchase, take action, join a cause, etc. And it makes diversity in that advertising a win-win. I found some statistics that I thought were pretty interesting. There's a website called inclusioninmarketing.com, and they conducted a representation study in 2021 and shared some really cool stats about representation in marketing that I think are really compelling. The full study is on their website, inclusioninmarketing.com. But here's some stats. 74% of consumers say representation in marketing is important for them, for the brands that they want to engage with. And then going deeper in that population, 84% of Black consumers say representation in marketing is important. 88% of Hispanic and Latino consumers say representation in marketing is important. So when you're thinking of donation or fundraising calls to action that you might be making in an ad, and you're going specifically after high value and affluent households, 77% of people surveyed who reported their income as $100,000 to $149,000 a year, 77% of them say representation in marketing is important. And then looking at the next income category, people who make over $150,000, 84% of those people surveyed said that representation in marketing is important to them when they make their decisions. So when we're thinking about the different areas and dimensions to consider when we're trying to reach our target audiences and we're thinking about the power of authenticity and speaking to them, we're talking about gender, we're talking about age, we're talking about disability, we're talking about race and ethnicity, we're talking about religion, we're talking about sexual orientation. All of these types of things can be choices that you make along the way as it pertains to what you're saying, as it pertains to how you're saying it, and who you are using to represent your message. That could be your on-camera actors, again, your stock footage, images or video, and your voiceover performers. So then we're reaching our audiences on different platforms. And this ties into what I said earlier about trying to reach people where they're at. So we can consider which platforms are the most appropriate for your advertising. Things to consider are the age and demographics of your target audience. We know that different generations and different age groups are using different platforms in different ways. I think also the purpose of your spot really plays into choosing which platform is the right place for it. And then, of course, we always have to consider our media buy budget. If money were no object, of course, we would all have television commercials running during Monday Night Football, but that's not the world we live in, right? I think it's also important to consider marketing's standard rule of 7. If you're not familiar with this marketing saying, basically, the idea is that a consumer, someone that you're trying to reach in your audience, likely will need to hear your brand name, your candidate name, your cause name, or your call to action. They'll need to hear it 7 times before they will actually take action. So if you are putting out a call to action spot and you want to raise money and you're targeting a specific audience, members of that audience will need to see or hear your ad 7 times before they're actually motivated to pick up their phone and go to your website and make a donation. I think it's also important to consider the expected ad behavior on the specific platform that you're choosing. So you have to think about where you're meeting people in their daily journey. Traditional radio, as an example, has a lot of car listenership. So people are in their car, they're driving, they're in the pickup line waiting for their kids, they're in the Dunkin' Donuts drive-through line. That's where people are actually listening to traditional radio. So if you're doing a call to action, it needs to be something really simple that they can remember, something that can stick in their mind. This is why people come up with taglines and jingles, because it's memorable, it's sticky. These people are driving. They're not going to be able to write down a long URL or write down a long phone number to call. So this is why people go after vanity URLs, vanity 1-800 numbers, things like that. And just as a quick note, according to Edison Research, 73% of Americans listen to the radio in their car. So while radio kind of has a it seems like radio has lost traction a lot in recent years, especially with the advent of a lot of audio and streaming apps. There are still an enormous amount of Americans that listen to the radio in their car. Traditional radio ads also sound different than an inline podcast ad. So when we're talking about advertising on other audio platforms, so I'm talking about Spotify, Pandora, the iHeartRadio app, or all the myriad of podcast apps, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, you're literally interrupting people. This is the big thing about advertising in this space. People have chosen playlists. People are listening to curated radio stations. People have made their own kind of perfectly organized music, and ads are dynamically inserted. So you are interrupting them on a music journey, or you are interrupting their podcast. And what's different about that type of advertising is it's usually not a 5 or 6 spot ad break. It's usually just 1 spot or 2 spots. And I think it's important to think about how you arrive at that person's phone, computer, desk when you are giving your messaging. So you're interrupting their playlist or interrupting their podcast. And people mainly listen to podcasts through headphones. 71% of people are headphone consumers of podcasts. Only 29% are listening through speakers. So from an intimacy standpoint, you are really, really right there with them when you're meeting them where they are. When we talk about the different platforms for audio, I will call out that Spotify Spotify specifically recently reversed their previous ban on political advertising. So you can now place ads in the Spotify Audience Network and Spotify's free ad-supported service inventory. You just cannot use their self-service tool, Spotify Ad Studio. You have to go through their advertiser identity verification process. So it's a little bit more work, but they did reverse that previous ban. As for the rest of the apps, terrestrial, local radio, satellite radio, SiriusXM is the parent company of both SiriusXM satellite radio and Pandora. YouTube Music, you would be underneath the Google political advertising rules. And podcasts might be, if you were going to a specific podcast, it could be on a podcast by podcast basis. If you're going to a network, I'm not currently aware of any networks that have bans on political or issue advertising. So then when we talk about television and streaming platforms, here is a really good consideration of how people are behaving differently. So Nielsen reported in 2023 that streaming usage accounted for nearly 40% of the TV audiences. Cable came in at 30%, and broadcast or over-the-air television was 20%. So that's a huge upending of where we've seen television and video audiences move. When we're talking about the different classifications, we have the local broadcast television over the air. That is what people are able to receive free to their television through now mostly digital antennas. We have cable that's delivered either via a traditional literal coaxial cable, or some cable providers have moved to internet and app-based providing. And then we have all of our streaming, connected TV, OTT, over the top. These are ways that people are getting media through the internet. We have the apps like Hulu, Roku, Pluto, Amazon, Netflix, Disney+. It's a combination of apps that do provide a live TV experience in addition to on-demand content, and then some that are only on-demand content. In this grouping, right now, Amazon Prime Video and Netflix do not allow political ads. So Netflix just recently launched their ad-supported product. They do not allow political or issue ads. The American Association for Political Consultants issued a blistering letter to them saying that that was unfair and prevents free speech. No move on that yet that I'm aware of. And then Amazon Prime Video has not also allowed political ads. And I think it's important to call out the potential impact here, as both of these streaming networks, both Amazon and Netflix, have started to offer live programming. So specifically think about like NFL on Thursday on Prime Video. That's a huge potential audience. And if that was on a broadcast channel, that would be something where you would be able to run an ad. But because that particular NFL product is on Amazon Prime Video, a streaming app, even though it's being delivered live, as a political or issue advertiser, you cannot access that ad space. So these are things that are important to think about as you're choosing which platforms. We also have our social media platforms. So right now, there is a great article online from Best Practice Digital, and they have an article about specific targeting restrictions and which platforms allow usage. Right now, most social media allows political and issue-based advertising. So anything under the Meta umbrella, that's your Facebook and Instagram, the parent company Alphabet, which would own Google and YouTube, Reddit and Snapchat, all allow for political and issue advertising. Our behemoth that came onto the market real strong during the COVID-19 pandemic, TikTok, does not allow any kind of political or issue-based advertising. And I will put a little asterisk to all of this. Sponsored content, SponCon, meaning you pay an influencer to speak to their audience about an issue, a product, a brand, a candidate. That could have different rules because it's them talking about something, being paid to talk about something. So I would just say your mileage may vary if you're going that direction in influencer advertising, which is not a space that I am an expert in. I'm specifically talking about when you place ads on social media. You are paying to have something appear in someone's feed. You have not paid someone to deliver your message on their feed. Where can you find great collaborators? I think this is a question that people ask a lot. One place that I love to meet people to work on political advertising, issue campaigns, candidates, and work with nonprofits are peer-to-peer marketplaces. So you can find production personnel if you were looking for video editors, sound editors, even people to create original things, so actually film content for you. Production Hub is an amazing resource. As far as I know, searching on the buyer end is free. As a user, I pay to have a profile so you can find it. So that's a really great resource. There are also places, if you're looking specifically for talent, Voice123 is a really great online marketplace where, again, I pay for a membership as a voice actor, and you, as someone searching for a voice, you can do free searches and reach out to people through their messaging tool, listen to demos and things like that on their website. Then we have kind of classic actor finder spaces, Backstage, Casting Networks, Actors Access. Those are places where you can post a specific casting call. You can talk about what area you're in, if it's something that can be done remotely or if you need people to physically report to a set. And all of those platforms include some sort of messaging feature where you can chat with folks. You can look for talent collectives, places where people have come together and say, hey, we are a group of people who all do a thing. Come meet us and choose from our great memberships. So that's an example of the collective that I founded, Blue Wave Voiceover. We specifically focus on democratic and progressive voiceover in that collective. You can search for individual freelancer websites. Let me Google that for you in parentheses. People like me do a lot of work to create SEO rich content for our website so that people can find us. Especially when we're talking about Gen Z folks, a lot of their initial behavior when they are trying to find someone to work with is just to go to Google and say, how do I hire a voice actor? How do I hire a video editor? So a lot of individual contributors have done tons of work to try and elevate their presence on search engine websites so they can be found by people who are looking for them. If you are in a major media market, I would say if you're in probably the top 1 through 20 media markets in our country, you have the ability to potentially utilize talent agencies. And one good thing about using a talent agency is that they have done a level of vetting for you. So if you go to sites like Voice123, Backstage, Casting Networks, Actors Access, a lot of those don't necessarily have a barrier to entry for the freelancers other than they have to pay to have a profile. So they haven't done any specific vetting, like, are you actually a professional? Do you actually have a good microphone? Do you actually have a studio? That isn't necessarily happening. So you're going to need to do your own due diligence on the peer-to-peer marketplaces and platforms. But if you reach out to a talent agent, in order for those people that they represent to get on their roster, there will have already been some sort of vetting process. So by developing a relationship with a talent agency in your area, you may be able to get kind of a one-stop shop. You can find on-camera actors or models for print ads. You can potentially find voice actors. And from a vendor perspective, working with a talent agency can be really easy because you have one vendor, but you can access many talents. And also you can ask a great performer or collaborator for referrals. Nothing makes me happier than when one of my clients comes to me and says, hey, Maria, we love working with you, but we need a Black male voiceover. Do you have any suggestions? I love referring my friends, and my friends love referring me. I also have gotten a lot of business from collaborators that I work with throughout the production chain. So sound engineers have referred me, video editors have referred me, and in turn, I have referred them. So don't be afraid to ask for a referral when you're looking for something different than what the person you hired does. I would also just call out, be aware of scams that are out there. There's a very prevalent scam that happens in the creative community called the overpayment scam, where you inquire about someone's services. There's an overpayment that happens. It can be really, really messy. So just if your spider sense is tingling, I would say trust your gut. Also, just be aware, I said earlier, in the peer-to-peer marketplaces, there really is not a vetting process. So don't forget to do your due diligence. I also want to call out just a little bit about AI when we're talking about collaborators. We are obviously in a fever pitch of different types of AI engines that are being generated for all sorts of things from a data perspective, from a research perspective, and they've also entered the creative space. So does AI have a place in what we're doing? For me, the power of human communication and human connection is led by the power of human creativity. And I'm really proud that the people that I choose to collaborate with value what I bring to the table as a collaborator. I think AI is great for research and it's great for menial tasks that we do not want to spend our time on. So things like admin, aggregating a lot of interesting data, getting insights, that's what AI is great at. I think it's also in the creative space is great for temporary things. So maybe you want to just put in a placeholder. That is where it works. But when you're thinking about your advertisement in the context of your entire media budget, in the context of your entire campaign, and in the context of your goals and how you want to actually really communicate with people, reach people, change people's minds, drive fundraising, do you really want to save $300 on not using a real actor or performer and instead use an online service that's kind of okay, but not perfect and a little bit stilted and a little bit weird? So I think it's just one of those places where we don't necessarily need AI to replace human creativity, human emotion, human performance. That's my opinion. I also would caution you that the text-based AI engines, for instance, ChatGPT on OpenAI, can potentially come with copyright and legal concerns, as the information that it's generating when you ask it to write a script instead of hiring a copywriter, it may come from machine learning that they have scraped from existing material that's copyrighted. You can read a little bit about the lawsuit that Sarah Silverman and other novelists put forward, saying that the OpenAI ChatGPT program kind of read their books as part of their machine learning and then kind of has their ideas, their original words, their text to be able to pull from when people are looking for things. The lawsuit is ongoing. Some of it was dismissed. Some of it on an infringement basis is still going on. But that's something to think about, right? So you don't want to be caught in a lawsuit because the ad that an online text generator wrote for you is actually somebody else's ad that's copyrighted. I think it's also important to call out for voice-based AI engines. We saw just a couple months ago, Scarlett Johansson had some very strong words for OpenAI after they released some of their voice models and their synthetic text-to-speech models. One of the models sounded surprisingly like her, even though they insist they did not use any of her source files or her voice to create it. There is a legal precedent, and it was actually Bette Midler versus, I believe, the Ford Motor Company, where Ford reached out to Bette Midler, asked her to sing a signature song for their commercial. She said no, and then they hired basically a Bette Midler impersonator instead, and it infringed on her right to publicity. And ultimately, the court landed in her favor, saying that they had infringed on her right to publicity by publishing a impersonation of her that effectively created an endorsement. So when you're using or choosing to use synthetic engines and things like that, I think it's important to think about things like that. And then finally, when we're aligning our work with our values, I think work is really powerful. I think it speaks clearly when we are aligned together with what we're trying to communicate. I would encourage you to show us your story, right? People want connection. People want genuine human connection. So show us, peel back the layers of the onion. Give us a peek into something that we ultimately wouldn't otherwise have access to see. Show us your story. I would encourage you to be truthful and authentic. Be for real, for real. That's a classic kind of influencer Gen Z TikTok speak, but be for real. I think people can sense it right away if you are being real and being authentic, or if you are putting it on. And if you're putting it on, they're going to swipe immediately away from whatever it is you're trying to say. The other thing I would recommend is that you trust your audience. They are smarter than a lot of people give them credit for, and they understand and digest things in a way that makes sense for their life and their generation. Put your trust in them and understand that you are communicating to them in a way that values them as opposed to talking down to them. And I think as a campaign, as an organization, establish your guiding principles or your North Stars. This is what we're willing to do. This is what we're not willing to do. I think that can also come into play when we're talking about comparative advertising, negative going into the positive, or negative or attack ads. Is that something that your candidate wants to engage in? Is that something your organization wants to do? Sometimes your hand is pushed because the other side begins mudslinging, negative ads, whatever, and you have to respond, right? You have to publicly respond. But if you have your guiding principles, your North Stars, what you're comfortable with, I think that is a great way to have bumpers along the side that keep you honest. And that's my presentation today. If you'd like to follow up after today's webinar, you can reach me via email, maria@voicebymaria.com. I'm happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. You can also DM me on Instagram @mariapendo. And if you and your organization are voice casting or looking for performers for progressive or democratic issues, candidates, campaigns, you can email casting@bluewavevoiceover.com, and our talent collective would be happy to help you. And other than that, I am happy to take questions.
Okay, that was pretty cool. We do have a bunch of questions, so let me just get into one immediately because something I was considering, which is, so can you tell us what exactly is overpayment? Even I didn't get that part exactly, and what suggestions that we can do to research on the person we are hiring to like avoid scams?
Yeah, for sure. So the overpayment scam comes with a lot of different creative careers. People, photographers have reported this. Different people in the production chain have reported it. But basically, someone says that they are going to pay one person for the job and then they overpay them. So if they say, I was going to pay you $1,000, they overpay them like $1,500 and say, oh, would you send that overpayment to this person? So it kind of creates a chain reaction. And the problem is that the original money didn't exist. So by the time that you send the extra money that they ask you to do, for instance, like someone could, you could reach out to someone and say like, oh, I would like to hire you for this. And they're like, great, well, I can take care of actually everything for you. I can hire voice actors. I can hire editors. Give me all of that money and I'll take care of it. And then what they're going to do is they're going to scam people along the way, in addition to not providing anything to you. So I would say look for people who have really well-built websites and portfolios. Ask for references. People have asked me before, like, hey, could you provide like a couple references of people that you've worked with before? I think that's a great way to vet and avoid scams.
Oh, that's great. Also, on the similar sort of line, you just mentioned at the same time about like the ban on political ads in various platforms. Do these okay? So a specific ad would be something like I am Joe Biden. And I like approve this message. That's like a political ad. But what about generic ad that just encourage people to go vote or participate in democracy? Those kind of things are also banned.
It depends on the platform. It depends on the platform. So you can request, from what I understand on some of these platforms, you can request, things to be reviewed. And if it's considered nonpartisan, like maybe it's just like a nonpartisan, like get out the vote, rock the vote, not endorsing any specific candidate or any specific platform, it is possible to get that into what would be considered a public service announcement channel as opposed to political advertising. So if you're submitting it as a public service announcement, it's a possibility that those platforms that ban political advertising would allow something that feels more like a public service. But it's really about the language you use, it's about how you frame the ad, and it's about how they feel about it. Sometimes I think the platforms can be very mercurial and they just draw a hard line and say like, it's about politics. We've heard from our users, they don't want it. We don't want it on our platform.
That would be tough actually to crack. But it's kind of interesting. Like in start, you had mentioned the fact that keep it short, keep it like 150 words, which seems like a really short. I mean, that's barely like a paragraph. But I suppose there is studies to show it works, and something like TikTok perhaps is like the best platform for that in 30 seconds. But I was wondering about the fact that like how does it work with such a short word count in the sense that you can probably say like two or three sentences at max. So how does that actually work?
I mean, it really is just as simple as that. You have very little real estate to communicate a message. So you won't be able to communicate the entirety of your message, right? So if your candidate or campaign has 4 key tenets of your platform, you're advocating for housing justice, you're advocating for lower cost of living, you're advocating for reproductive rights, you're not going to be able to get everything into every spot, right? So this is where we talk about that power of the rule of 7. So maybe you're creating one spot that's specifically about your candidate or campaigns, specific to reproductive justice. Then you've got another spot that's talking specifically about housing justice. You've got another spot that's specifically talking about that cost of living in the economy, right? So this is where we talk about the difference between an individual spot and a campaign, right? So maybe a campaign has multiple spots and you're going to release those like a drip calendar, so that you're reaching people along the way. You're increasing their knowledge of your candidate, your campaign, your issue. You're including more things. But I think the initial inclination is let's make a commercial. Let's tell them everything they need to know, everything but the kitchen sink. And then you write it and you realize it's 45 seconds long and you only have the budget to make a 15-second ad. So then the question is, what can you say at the end of that ad to get people excited about learning more? Can you encourage them to go to your website where you have the full platform? Can you encourage them to follow you on social media where free and organically you can share more information with them? This is where it comes into the kind of marketing and campaign strategy of it. You have to make tough choices. At the end of the day, advertisers and advertiser networks, when they say 15 seconds, they mean 15 seconds. It cannot be 15.2. It cannot be 15.5. It's 15. And you have to abide by those very, very firm boundaries.
Mm. That's, yeah, it's like you said, no, you should have like a full campaign. This actually ties into another question that I had. Like you had mentioned the fact that we should talk to like different kinds of people for like different issues or whatever it is, whether you want to talk to like black people or Latino people, etc. I was wondering, is there such a thing as like the American voice? Because if I don't have the budget to make like, I mean, to be very frank, like a lot of our users, for example, would not have the budget to hire like 15 people for like, or at least even like 4 people. So is there something that we can make that sounds like all American as such in like a single ad?
No, but there's a lot of people that think there is. So when
Yeah.
we talk about like a neutral American accent or a neutral American person, that is 100% based on a white, cisgender European ideal. And it's
Hmm.
racist, it's ageist, it's classist, and it is sexist, right? So I still see casting calls today that say, we're looking for a voice actor, no accent. Everyone has an accent. Everyone has a natural accent. People in New York sound different than people in Florida, sound different than people in West Virginia or California. So when we say things like no accent or neutral accent, that is rooted in colonialism. That's rooted in white
Hmm.
supremacist culture. So I think make choices that speak to what you know about your demographic, what you know about who you're trying to affect change with. And then you can also run some A/B testing, right? If you
Hmm.
are targeting with one ad, you're targeting both, let's say, Black voters and Hispanic or Latino voters, do some A/B testing. Do you find that Hispanic and Latino voters react to an ad if it has what is traditionally sounding like an African American narrator? If you have someone that is speaking with a recognizable Hispanic accent, for instance, if it was running in Miami with perhaps someone who comes from Cuba or has a Cuban accent, do you find that the only people who interact with your ad or react to your call to action align with that population? Or are you seeing people from other diverse categories still responding, even though the person is not specifically linked to their heritage? And I
Hmm.
think this comes to trust your audience too, right? I am a Caucasian cisgender woman. I do not only buy products that I see commercials with Caucasian cisgender people, right? So trust
Hmm.
me that I have enough imagination that if a commercial includes a Black family, if a commercial includes an Indian family, it doesn't mean that I'm immediately going to shut down. But if you
Hmm.
are asking me specifically to do something, how are you communicating authentically with me? It doesn't necessarily have to be a pure alignment on all demographic characteristics. But I think, like the reproductive justice example I got, if you put an old looking white guy on TV who sounds like Sam Elliott with a low, gravelly voice, and he's the one telling me that I need to do something about voting for candidates that support reproductive justice, I'm going to be like, why are you showing me this old white guy? Like, this is not that I don't want his support, not that I don't want him to be a part of the fight, but like he is not immediately affected by not being able to access reproductive justice in my state, right? So I think when
Hmm.
you have topics that really do zero in on a specific population, that's when you want to really choose performers or alignment to the demographic and say, we hear you, we see you, we meet you here.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, here's another question that just came actually that is more to what you were saying. Now, can the voiceover artist, or is it right for us to ask the voiceover artist to help us write the scripts for these ads if we pick them from that demographic or the ones that we're targeting? Is it better to like ask them to edit it or align it more with the community we're targeting because we may not be an expert in that community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we have had requests come in where, somebody will say like, "Hey, we are a team of English speaking folks and we are specifically wanting to do an ad in Spanish. So let's not walk into a fire here by putting our script in Google Translate and ending up doing something really embarrassing. Let's ask somebody who actually speaks Spanish to translate this for us. So as an example, some of the bilingual voice talents that I work with who are fluent in both English and Spanish, they will offer translation services as an add-on and say like, bring me your script and I will take your words and turn them into the same conversational Spanish as you've written in this conversational English. So I think it's just about choosing the right collaborator who's willing to do that for you. There's some people who are like, look, I speak Spanish, but like translating and like figuring out the differences in like some of the nuance, right? That's like social and language and heritage and cultural, like that's actually hard work and I don't want to do it. So I would say just look for collaborators that are willing to do that. But there's many times that people have said to me like, hey, like our nonprofit doesn't do a lot of advertising. Like we don't do a lot of production. We don't hire a lot of actors. So as you're reading this script, if there's something that doesn't feel natural to you, like feel free to change it. And I'm always happy to do that. And I don't charge for that service. And a lot of times it's just making language sound more colloquial. So if you're saying something in your script like, we cannot go forward, and the rest of the script is really conversational, I might say to you, it might sound better if we say, we can't go forward, because I actually wouldn't say we cannot go forward in regular kind of colloquial speak. I would use a contraction. So I'll make recommendations to folks like that. And again, that's not something I would charge for. I would just say like, hey, when the words came out of my mouth, this felt unnatural. Let's tweak that a little bit. It gets a little bit trickier when you're talking about product marketing, because a lot of that stuff is going through legal approvals and there's actually regulations, especially with things like drugs and the FDA. So like on that side of advertising, I never change a word, a comma, a period, nothing. But in this space where you're trying to communicate a message and you're trying to meet people, especially really, really organically and authentically, yes, I think it's totally fine to ask your performer like, hey, does this sound right?
That's right. I mean, another question that we got based pretty much on your reply was the fact that have you ever gotten an ad that you weren't comfortable with, or in general, how do you deal with this kind of situation? If you got an ad, you're like, okay, like let's say you were hired and halfway through you're like, all right, this is not something that really aligns with me. Like, what do we do at that point? Like, what kind of scope is there?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say specifically for political advertising, issue advertising, causes, most of the time people pick a side. So the production companies that I work with, they are specifically working with me because they know that I have committed to one side of the fence. And they know that they're not going to hear my voice voicing for the people that they are specifically trying to defeat. So I recommend to performers and freelancers and collaborators out there who want to work with political candidates, campaigns, issues, nonprofits, that they pick one side of the fence because they want to be able to say, your values align with my values, and I want to be a part of your journey in getting this person elected, this issue passed, this nonprofit more money, whatever it is. I've had just a couple situations in my career where people have reached out to me. One person was running as an independent, which I don't necessarily have a problem with on the surface. I think our two-party system in this country is flawed. It is what it is, whatever. But then when I went to their website, they had a lot of things that did not speak to me. And they had a lot of feelings about things that I was like, I really wouldn't want this person elected. It feels like this person is going to do more damage or good based on my values. And I said, thank you very much for the inquiry, but it's not a good fit for me. I had a studio that I have a relationship with. They reached out to me to work on content for a nonprofit organization that is very opposed to reproductive justice for women, which is a cause that's very important to me. And the studio was an intermediary. So they didn't write it. They don't make the content. A customer came to them and said, we'd like to make sound recordings. Can you help us find a voice actor? They picked my voice from a demo. I literally did not know I was even in the mix for this job until the studio reached out and said like, hey, a client picked you from your demo. Normally, that's a great day. I didn't even have to audition. I didn't have to do any labor to get this job. That's awesome. I read the script and I was like, oh no. This is not for me. So what I did was I very graciously said, thank you so much for reaching out. I always appreciate when you bring work to my door. This is not for me. It flies in the face of everything that I believe in. However, I know someone whose values align with this. So I said to that studio engineer, I would recommend that you reach out to this actor. This actor is a friend of mine. We are colleagues. We are collegial, and we are on opposite sides of the spectrum politically. And I said, this person would be great for it. So I gave him her website, her demos, her email. She booked the job. So what I did was not only did I help a colleague pay their bills and get a job, but I also preserved that relationship with the studio by saying, I don't want this job, but here's a replacement for me. So it was a no with a replacement. And that studio has continued to send me work, and they had no problem with me politely declining that opportunity.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, as we're coming to the end of this, a lot of weight is put on authenticity. That's how you ended your presentation. Also, you're talking about like AI. So there is a question which, on the surface, yes, it sounds similar like the question we had asked before. Basically, this person's asking like, what steps can we take to ensure that we are hiring a genuine artist and not someone who might be using AI? And how exactly can we vet people to ensure, they are who we want them to be? But I suppose in a broader sense, like, how do we know that some people are authentic? Like, what is it, something that stands out among people that they're doing this work, that they're authentic? Because I presume the AI stuff, I suppose if you hear it you can tell, if
Yeah.
like, it doesn't sound very authentic. But in people, like, how do you find the right people, basically?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, again, you can turn to both people's websites and social media. Of course, people can tell you the story that they want to tell, but I think you can tell fakers from people who are making real authentic content pretty easily when someone's kind of putting on a show versus like actually being real. When I'm up for major advertising campaigns or major roles in animation or video games, casting and teams are absolutely doing like social media audits of people. Like, are you the kind of person that our audience is going to write letters about and be like, we can't believe you hired this person because they're actually straight garbage? So, I think actors do a really good job of making sure that they are presenting, as much as possible, a very presentable and potentially neutral position online. The other way, you may not be able to find out everything, right? Like, you could do a background check, but that doesn't tell you necessarily that someone might be crazy and spewing garbage online, right? The other thing that I would say is you can ask to meet with people. So one way that I work with a lot of collaborators, even though I'm essentially an invisible voice, you don't need to see me. I put on a very nice shirt today for this webinar, but most of the time I'm just in my hot box doing voiceover, wearing pajamas a lot of the times. You don't necessarily see me, but if you'd like to see me, I can join a Zoom call with you. I can join a Google Meets call. I can join your Microsoft Teams link. And a lot of times teams will be like, hey, we'd really love to direct you while you're reading. Can we like be with you when you're recording? Absolutely. And if you're like, hey, it's really important to us that we are hiring a disabled actor. It's really important to us that we're hiring a Black actor. Ask them to turn on their camera. In voiceover specifically, it has not been uncommon to find people doing racist impressions of different
Really?
kind of stereotypes. There have been, in recent memory, we had Hank Azaria on The Simpsons doing the voice of Apu, which was an Indian American character. And ultimately, he resigned that role when he heard from the Indian American community that they felt that that portrayal was racist. That was not something that he had considered, and it's not something that casting had considered when he got that job in the 90s. There was a little bit of a scandal in kind of the working class voiceover industry where a woman was presenting herself as a Black woman online, and actually she was a Caucasian woman. And she had created like animated avatars and did not have a picture of herself. But a way to figure that out really quickly would have been to be like, hey, we'd love to direct you on Zoom and please turn your camera on. And you would have seen right away that she was a white woman doing a very racist, stereotypical Black accent, right? So I think that is the great way. Just ask to meet with people. You can meet with them right at the time of the recording session, or you could have just like a 15-minute get to know you. Like, is this the right person to collaborate with?
Okay. Sounds a little unbelievable that somebody would like for example, that lady you mentioned. I'm like, it's
I
insane
know.
that you think that
It's
if
it
you think I
sounds
don't know, I'll find out.
it sounds like a movie, right? But no, it
Yeah.
happens.
All right, but anyway, that seems like a nice place to wrap this up. We've taken quite a bit of your time as it is. But thank you very, very much, Maria. This was like really informative. It's really helpful to our audience who like basically they are people who are getting into this industry and they need to know how to make ads, like you said, with like actual authenticity and what it means to them. So thank you so much for your time and sharing all the information with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me today, and nice to meet everyone virtually who joined us today.
All right, bye bye.